Welcome back to Grandpa and the Millennial. I'm Anthony the Grandpa.
And I am Natasha the Millennial. And today we had a fantastic conversation with our guest, Kayla Landrum. She is a photo producer and took us through quite the journey of her just personal and professional life. She is 29 years old. She took us through working LA Fashion Week, Sacramento Fashion Week, working as a photo producer for The Hollywood Reporter, CBS. There were a couple big names in the entertainment industry that she noted working with, like Oprah and Lady Gaga, and just took us through some really cool stories. So I thought today's conversation was just so interesting. She's very passionate and gave us a couple good takeaways. So what did you take away from the conversation?
She was incredibly engaging. Her story is, it's unique. It's also, you've heard it before, but it's from a unique perspective, talking about how she didn't drop out of college, but she had to quit college. Mm-hmm. And then just talking through how she had a vision and a dream that she didn't give up on. And then all of the obstacles that she had to face, and then imposter syndrome and not having a degree for a period of time, and going through therapy and how that's impacted her personal life as well as her professional life. I just thought overall, as we went through that conversation, she has a story that should be heard and talked about, and how you overcome adversity. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think so too. And all of that is really, it started from the beginning, like leaning into her dream. She had so much belief in what she was doing that was outside, people around her were telling her like, hey, rein it in a little bit. But I took a lot of that away, and every single step in making it through that is just the belief in herself and the process, and, believing everything will work out, and dreaming big, I thought was fascinating. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of the things she worked through, one big thing for me was how much she was willing to learn, to talk to people, to step out of her comfort zone and give it, a try, volunteer, do internships, like really step in and figure out what she was doing. I think that was a huge one, the openness to learning and to never stop doing that. And I think it was just kind of all of that was weaved throughout her story, which was fascinating.
I agree. I think that those who are listening, you're going to take away a lot from this conversation, and you're definitely going to take away how to overcome adversity, mm-hmm. and how to come out on the other side. She talked about depression and some of the challenges she had throughout that journey. And when I think about some of the stories we hear, or you hear stories where people don't get to that other side, you're going to be able to take away on how to be focused and what steps she took to put together a plan to get to the other side and execute on it. So that's definitely a big takeaway for the listeners.
Agreed. I'm excited for them to hear this one.
Me too. So we changed up our format a little bit. We're having a little bit of a conversation before we go into the episode. So we'll do this moving forward. It's only 4 or 5 minutes, but I do also want to just say thank you to everybody that's listening. Thank you to Kayla for coming on and sharing her story. And let's listen to her story.
Let's let them hear it. Kayla, tell us your story.
Well, I grew up in Sacramento, California, and I grew up to two parents who were very realistic and didn't have a dreamlike sense of the world. My dad does IT and my mom is a human resource person. So as a kid, I was always doing fashion shows and singing and wanting to be an ice skater, and my parents didn't know quite what to do with me, and always tried to be think more realistically. Or when I was I want to be a fashion designer, they're I don't know what that means. And it was always this fun way of me introducing them to things, and always wanting to buy a magazine and always reading. And they're really great about being nice and being yes, we want you to dream big, but also think realistically. And so that was something that translated when I got into high school, and they were you need to join Avid to go to college, because neither of my parents had college degrees. And I was, my sophomore year, I was no, I'm going to be an editor. I have a yearbook. And it caused this like actual like big argument. It was a big deal at school to like get me out of the AVID program because they really don't let people leave it. And I ended up in yearbook, and it was this thing that like yearbook actually propelled my career in a way that I didn't realize until years later. But I ended up, being editor-in-chief of the yearbook and going on after that to like kind of produce and edit these like lookbooks
Well, let me
later
pause.
on.
Sorry, let me pause and ask you a question. So, are you a single child?
No, I have two other sisters.
Okay, so where are you at in the order?
Okay. I am the oldest, and I have two younger sisters.
Okay, and how old are you?
I am 29, and they're 4 and 6 years younger than me.
Got it. So you're right in the middle of the millennial.
It's just actually at the end.
At the end?
At the end, it's almost, I think, maybe.
I'm not super elder millennial, but like I am in it.
I was just saying it's okay. Last week I was called a boomer, so which I'm not.
On the podcast recording, it was fantastic. So were your and it's funny. So we went to high school together, so I know a little bit, and your sisters were younger than us, so I know of them, but not know them totally. So were you like the one child that stood out? Are your sisters like you, or were your parents were just like, why can't you just be like the other ones?
I think the great thing is like my sisters and we get along really well, but we're all very different. My sister Amanda is like graduating to be a nurse this year, and my sister Samantha like is on the vet track and like doing physical therapy, like, and both in the medical field. And I think we're all like very similar, but they're also like super athletic, and like I was a little bit more like, I feel like heads in the clouds sometimes, like always like dreaming a lot bigger. Well, like they're very like realistic about things. But we all very like have great same sense of humor, and also very independent. But as far as like what we did creatively, it's all very different. They're like medical track in there.
So when you were growing up, you said your parents were focused on college. So would you say that you lived in a strict home growing up, or just focused?
I don't think it was strict. I think it was just like focused, and they like, as parents, really just wanted the most for their kids. They got together really young. They had kids really young, and I think it was like maybe a fear, I'd like talking out loud for my mom, but like a fear of like making sure that like us as kids had more than they did, that we could go to college and do well in school and kind of be able to like have careers, but also because of the financial burdens of being so young, they also didn't want us to have that financial burden, growing up and getting a job and thinking about college and all of that. And so I think there's like a bit of a fear that like if I went and just did the thing that was like had no money in it and like maybe not even go to college, like that, what kind of life I would have, I think gave my parents a lot of fear. And that kind of maybe tried to get them to deter me to like going into like exactly what I wanted to do and thinking about things more realistically.
Yeah, I'll speak from. I could be.
I knew you'd have something.
Your parents' age. I obviously can't speak for them, but for my children, absolutely. We as parents, we're looking at what's best for our children, trying to put them on the right path, and we want to make sure the best parents are making sure that their children are going to be happy, but at the same time, we want to be realistic that there's a job out there where there is an income to be made and you can be self-sufficient. So I can certainly and definitely see that. As you talk about it now and you look back and you can have an appreciation for what they were doing, when you were in high school and they put you into that AVID program, did you have an appreciation and understanding for it then? Or did it kind of feel like you had these big dreams and they just wanted you to go to college?
No, it was awful. We got into so many arguments about like, I'm a little bit more grounded now, but back then I was like, I'm going to like sell everything and I'm going to move away. I had these like crazy things. I was gonna like live on a yacht and, it basically just do that, like have the gap year or I was always like doing internships and running around town, I felt like, and it caused a lot of like arguments between my parents and I because when it came down to like college and thinking about where I was going to go to college, I was like, I'm going to go to Columbia or NYU. And my parents were like, how are you going to find $75,000 for an out-of-state tuition to these schools? I'm like, I don't know, it'll just appear. And so I think that was like where more of the arguments happened, where I was like, if it's meant to be, like money will be found. And they're like, that's not how the world works. But like we did find like this compromise, like going to Azusa Pacific University because it had like the largest scholarship program, but it was a school I didn't want to go to. And it was really, I was like, anywhere in California is too close. That's what I thought. And I was like, I was on a 4-year track to, like I was going to go to school 2 years in Azusa and I was going to transfer at NYU when I found this like sum of money. And that ended up not happening. And it also like, that didn't happen, but it's also like, because it didn't happen, like I'm where I'm supposed to be and I'm still doing exactly what I wanted. So it's just this like interesting way of life happens. But no, we got into a lot of arguments about it constantly where we just didn't see eye to eye. But it was also like they were helping financially, so they kind of had a say in the matter for college.
So when you were going through high school, did you just have one dream and you knew what you wanted to be, or was it all over the place? Like you had talked about a lot of different things that you wanted to do. Were you very driven towards that one dream?
Yeah, for me, I really wanted to be a fashion editor of a magazine, and I wanted to work in a magazine, and I wanted to work for Teen Vogue, and that was something that I would even cut and paste magazines and put it in a notebook and make notes about what I would have done differently. And I did photo shoots and I was in yearbook, and I was very much like, I have to do these things in order to like have this career. And I was very driven by it, but it was also, I had this like other sense of mind that was like, if that didn't happen and my parents weren't going to let me go to the college that I wanted to, I was going to take a gap year and like backpack through Europe like that. That's like, but I was very driven. I like signed up to do Sacramento Fashion Week and volunteer for it. I like helped, do volunteer for different things that like had to do with magazines, and like even toured like the radio stations around town and the like news broadcast centers. Like I just really wanted to be educated on what journalism was, and that was something that I was like very driven to do in high school to like help set me up for it. But in my mind at the time, I was like, if I don't go to the college that I want to based for this career, then like the whole dream doesn't happen. And I could only see that like singular thing. And that's what caused a lot of our arguments.
So you see, just you personally, so you're a dreamer, creative, you're putting yourself out there. Not everybody is like volunteering and going and signing up and doing all these things. And to even have that like carefree, I was like I was like secure, like, oh my gosh, I have to do the thing that's the safest, right? And so do you have, and maybe that's how it seems like you have like a carefreeness about you. I don't know if that's a word, but is that kind of, where do you think that came from? I mean, it was, your parents are kind of telling you one thing and you're also dreaming big enough and saying like, oh, you just had this, it sounds like this confidence that it would work out. So where do you think that comes from? Is that just how you are?
Yeah, I like joke it's a little bit of narcissism. I don't know. It's like I've I don't know. I've always had this sense of just like hope and dream, and from what I've noticed is a lot of people who work in the same industry that I do, it's like you kind of have to believe that it's going to happen or it won't. It's kind of like this manifesting, and it is part narcissism. It's like if you don't think that you're going to accomplish it, then in a sea of people who are all going for the same dream, like you won't. If there's like an ounce of doubt, and that's not something I was like, oh, I have to be confident this is going to happen, because there's always been tons of moments of doubt. But I just always like had this feeling that I couldn't like put into words. I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And like, no one's going to stop me. I'm going to figure it out.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So can I ask you about the yearbook class? So you said looking back now, you didn't realize at the time how significant or impactful it was. So what was it about the class? Like, what were you doing? This was in line of, what your next step was going to be, or did you learn along the way, like, oh, this is where I need to maybe, focus a little more for what I wanted to do? What was so significant about that class?
The whole reason I got into yearbook is kind of like this kismet thing, because I wanted to be a newspaper, because in my head that was more along the lines of, writing, and it was an actual publication. And so the summer between freshman and sophomore year, I think, or it was maybe springtime, but I went on a missions trip to Texas and to help rebuild houses after Hurricane Ian. And Mr. Jordan, who is the yearbook teacher, was at a separate church who was also happened to be working on the same houses. And all these churches from Sacramento that were not connected were here. And his daughter, Zoe Jordan, and I like kind of met and talked about yearbook, and I was like telling her what I wanted to do. And it was because of her and him that were like, you have to join yearbook. Like, that's exactly what you want to do. If you want to like write and design and take photos and put this all together, like that is what yearbook was, which I didn't know that's what it was until like that moment. And that's when I was like, oh, I have to be in yearbook. I have to get out of Avid. And we had to like, to get out of Avid, I had to meet with the teacher. I had to meet with like the counselor and like plead a case as to why like my future was going to be better set up because of yearbook than Avid. And yeah, it was like, then the next year when I joined as a sophomore, it was like learning that like you have to write on a deadline. And then when you become an editor, you have to manage the staff. You have to, edit people's stories. You have to pick the best photos to go into it. You have to come up with the concept and a theme. And those were, now that I'm in my job, it was like, I didn't know it, but I was like, those are all things that like in the industry that I'm in, that you have to tell like a through line story through like managing and, hitting deadlines, or it doesn't happen. And that was something that I learned while in that class and being in it for 3 years of high school.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's where you started learning your profession, your expertise. And so as you're going through high school, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, your dream is becoming solidified, that you know what direction you want to go in. And so take us through graduating and going to college and that decision-making process and what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, for college, it was kind of like I had a full ride scholarship to a school in New York, and that's where I really wanted to go to. And it didn't work out, and I ended up going to Azusa. And so Azusa is like a private Christian college. And I grew up from like a Christian background, but like going into a bubble of a school like that kind of like suppresses a little bit of like free speech, and even in their journalism classes is all kind of centered around like a religious thing. It was something that I like really fought while I was there, and it was really like hard being at Azusa Pacific for like me personally, when I was like, I want to be a part of these op-eds and writing this hard-hitting news story, but we can't actually like write about what's happening in our school, because there was a lot of things going on with trans rights at the time, and a professor having to like step down because of it, and like students were not allowed to write about it. Their stuff was getting like cut from the magazine and newspaper. So it was this thing where I was like very sure that I was like, this is my dream, this is what I want to do. But I'm like now at a college, and I'm so thankful to be in college. I'm like, now I'm at a school that's like, what I'm learning in these like skills are not going to actually be like applicable when I go into the real world, is kind of like what it felt like. And due to like financially not being able to afford it anymore with my family, and there are some like home things happening, I had to like drop out. my sophomore year of college. And that was one of the things where I was like, as a very driven person who like in the small time I was at college, like was an editor on the yearbook and the newspaper, and like started like was a part of a fashion blog and all these stuff to like set this groundwork, then kind of had to drop out and go back to Sacramento, which to me was like absolute failure. It was like the dream's not happening anymore.
Yeah. And so people are going to ask, and they're going to be curious, like, how much depth can you get into it? Was it something with you? Yeah. You say failure. Did you have to drop out?
No, it was a financial thing, and it was a family thing, that we were finding some things out, and it was a time where like the next summer I was going to go to DC to work in an actual newsroom, and my mom and I were on the phone, and you know, they were like, we can't afford it. We just can't afford college anymore. And even with the money that I was making and doing it, I was like, even during that semester, I was like, I had like maybe $80 to my name each week, like, and not eating meals because it was cheaper to like not go on a meal plan and all these things. So it was just like really hard. And it was just something that was like, this stuff's going on at home. We can't afford it. Like my dad wasn't working at the time. You know, they have 2 other kids they have to take care of. Like it was just something that was like, you can come back here and go to community college, which is what, you know, they kind of really wanted in the first place. And it was just, I was like, no, I'm not going back to college if I'm leaving. And so, yeah, it was this thing. I was like, I had great grades. I was like very set up, but it was just not in the cards anymore.
Yeah. And so oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to just say, and to me that like, that was the failure, was that I was even in a position where I had to leave.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the different perspectives, like, life happens, right? So I have 3 kids, and I know people within my life and my community where life happens, and all of a sudden the things that you can afford today, you can't afford tomorrow. And the entire family has to adjust and make sacrifices and decisions. And I would imagine at that moment, is it fair to say that you felt like your dream was being taken away from you?
Yeah. I mean, I was also like in therapy too. You know, it was a perfect storm because I was in therapy, kind of going over like just everything that was happening with my family. And it was this moment where I was just like, I have to like give up this like fantasy. And it was just felt like my dream and what I wanted, like by me dropping out. And in that moment, it felt like everybody else, I proved them right by not like making it happen. And that was something that I was like, I think for 3 months after, like when I dropped out, was like, I didn't want my parents like telling our extended family who was in Sacramento that I was in town. Like I kept it like, oh, and except for like my very few close friends, like I didn't like really tell anyone I was back. And I was like in this very depressive state for like a few months after that happened, because I was so embarrassed about the situation. It's like not something you want to like just tell people, that it's like, yeah, financially like couldn't afford it, so I had to drop out. You know, it's kind of this taboo thing to like talk about money in that way now, where like I'm totally fine to talk about it, but at the time it was something that was like a very sensitive subject.
Yeah. And I mean, at that age, sometimes it can be hard to understand. What is you, 20, 21, somewhere in that ballpark?
I was 19 when it happened. Yeah.
19. So is it fair to say that this was your identity, your school and what you were doing? This was your identity, and it was taken away.
Yeah.
So I cannot wait to get to the comeback, because I know it's coming.
Yeah, because we know what you do now. Yeah. So the story progresses. So once you have to, and I'm sure, and I'm going to hold some questions, but I always think, right, hindsight's always 2020. You look back and you think differently, or you remember how you felt, but you'd probably feel differently now. So I want to hear a little bit more, and then I'll ask some of those questions. But so what was kind of your next thing? So you're back home, you're not really telling anybody, you're not going to school, you don't want to go to community college. You still, I'm assuming what you wanted to do didn't change, but what were your next steps? Where'd you go from there?
Yeah, it started with, I had to like get a job and I I think it started with I started working at Freestyle Clothing Exchange, which is this consignment shop in Sacramento, and I just started as a sales associate, and like 3 weeks into working there, they're like, "We're gonna put on a fashion show," and I was like, "Great, I know exactly how to do that." And I had really no idea. I had never done it. I had just watched a bunch of fashion shows. And I told them exactly how it was going to happen. I did it for practically free. I figured out how to I casted models from different sites and Facebook, and then I went and found like hair and makeup people who needed to have like hours to get their certification. So they did everything for free to like gain their hours. And I used the clothing that was in the store and emceed it and like put on this big fashion show. And then after that, I was talking to EK, who's the owner, and her daughter, Vanessa. And I was just kind of like, hey, you don't have like a social media presence, or I mean, they did kind of, or it was like, I could write these blogs for your website. And it just kind of, I convinced them in a way to give me the freedom to just like be creative and do Instagram posts and write blogs. And I still did like certain, like I worked on the floor for a little bit here and there, but then it was like my whole thing became about doing all of this like social media stuff for them and working with them. And then from there, it just kind of like lit this fire that I was like, no, like it's not over. And from there, I started like interning at different radio stations and basically like working at like their big live shows. And when they would have private, like if they would win, like people listening would win tickets, I would like do the like private shows. And then I was meeting all these musical artists. And then I went to like LA Fashion Week and basically like interned there and did their social media for a week. And it was just kind of different things here and there, and working in Sacramento Fashion Week. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to start doing all of these different things and get really well connected into like the creative like fashion scene of Sacramento. And that just like then became what it was at the time. And that's what I did to be like, all right, I need to get this experience somehow if I'm not going to be in college.
So you were networking, and is this
I was just going to ask.
is this just all self-driven? Were you studying? Were you reading books, or was this just your passion and you saw a shot, took your shot, and then you just started leaning into it?
I had these two books, and there was this one called Jobs in the Fashion Industry, and it was one of my favorite books, that and the Teen Vogue Handbook. But it starts with all of these people who are at very high level positions in the fashion industry, like a designer or a fashion editor or a photo producer and all these things. And they basically go through and they do an entire article about where they started, what their dream was, and how they got to where they were. And at this time when I was reading it, a lot of these people like started out just as like mailroom at Vogue, and then like went over to be an assistant, for a fashion associate, and like to see how people kind of jumped around and then entered into like where they were supposed to be, like made sense to me. And reading that and seeing how that was like happening for those people, I was like, okay, like I'm going to learn everything about the journalism and the various like communication places through, fashion shows, like writing, clothing store, like the radio station, like all these things. To me, I was like, I'm just going to learn about everything. And then figure out what it is that like truly makes me happy and what I'm good at. And so that's kind of when I realized was like, I don't have to have this 4-year plan. I can just kind of follow what is making me happy and what I'm good at in the moment.
So I have a question there. So your original plan and dream was to go through the 4 years college and then take a path to get to where you're at and where you want to be. So that doesn't work out and you find this confidence, you're putting on shows and you're traveling across the state. Was there any sense of imposter syndrome from not finishing the way that you originally thought that the plan was supposed to go and not finishing college at first?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't start talking about that. Like, I lied about going to college and getting my degree well up until like maybe a couple of years ago. I told my job that I had a college degree, or else they wouldn't have given me the job. So it was this thing that was like, yeah, it was a huge imposter syndrome. And anytime, I still don't have it. I'm actually currently like within the next like 8 months, I will have my college degree. I did go back to school. But even like over the, past few years of my life, there's a lot of people when they found out, they were like, oh, well, you have to go back. And I'm like, that's not for you to have an opinion on. And I don't think the way I'm a very like, retrospective thing of college is like the way that it's presented to certain people is it's actually like it creates societal debt. And if you don't know what you want to do, there are other ways to explore that without having to like rack on. To me, it was like $100,000 of debt and then still not know what you want to do or be set up correctly. And I think after all of these things that I've done, I'm like, we need to start having more internships and programs of like helping foster and teach people like what they want to do rather than having this like set curriculum where you are actually not being applied. That was how it was for me. And yeah, it's still kind of like a sensitive subject sometimes, like to bring it up because a lot of people say it's like has a lot of pride in their degree, and I think that they should because it's a huge thing that not everyone gets to do. But I also don't think that makes me less of a person because of it. And sometimes that's how people come off.
Yeah, it absolutely doesn't make you less of a person. So everybody's path is different, which is why we do these, tell your story. I went into the Marine Corps when I got out of high school, never got my degree, and have the same conversations that I'm sure you've had and people are having. As you're going through, so I can relate, so I'm going to ask some questions that I can relate to. You're sitting in doing your job. You've told people you've had a degree. And I'm sure there's different levels of degrees that you're in the room with and that are doing the things that you're doing and you're better than them. Is there a sense of frustration ever or a sense of why am I faking it? Why am I not just being I'm better than these individuals and not being conceited in any way, but just almost a sense of frustration? Did you ever feel that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, yeah, I wouldn't say it's like I'm better than them. I felt that, but I don't think it was like due to a college thing. But yeah, even both of my sisters, they both got their degrees and went to four-year colleges. And, they were lucky enough to do that. And they would poke at the fact that I didn't have one or kind of like, be like, oh yeah, like if you would have just like finished. And I don't think that they really understood until we had a conversation about it later that it's like, just because you went and did that, like doesn't make you better than me. Or if you're in a medical field, and not that they have ever made that, but it was like, you have to choose your words. Cause like, yeah, that is a very frustrating thing that it's like, sometimes people have that just air about them that they are better because of it. But I don't know that I've ever been like, oh, we're better or you're worse. It's just different. It's just a different like applications.
It is. And so did you and do you find yourself working harder than you may have thought you might have had to work, or you're working harder than people sitting next to you in the room that may have that degree? And not all, I'm absolutely bucketing or stereotyping, but Do you find yourself working harder than like something to prove, to make sure that that's not something someone can call out on you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it like I definitely have that. I mean, I think for me, like it's as something that I've learned like in therapy, people have different types of addictions. And to me, it was like I have this addiction to work. It's like my self-worth, like me getting promotions and moving up and the amount of money I make and all of this and that. Like to me, my entire identity was like driven by that. And that was something that like spans from my relationship with my father and things that happened to me when I was a kid. Like it's more driven from that, but college definitely plays like a factor in that. And so because of that, it doesn't matter. There's a period of time in life, like it didn't matter what title I had or who I'd been working with or what I had done with my life. And I still feel like I am not good enough. I'm lacking, like yeah, severe imposter syndrome for years. Cause it's this thing where I was like, I have to accomplish more. I have to do more. I need more, but never like, it was just this thing where I was like, I'm trying to fulfill something that's not going to ever make me happy by doing it that way.
It's so fascinating because I feel like it's twofold, which is often like overachievers are like, very hard on themselves. But to, on one hand, think like I'm, not good enough or I shouldn't be here. And then the other side is like, I'm taking every opportunity, I'm creating opportunity. I have the confidence to take this step. Is like, some people are like, I'm not even going to try, right? Like it's way outside of people's comfort zone. So it's just interesting that you could, you're hard on yourself, but also you're like taking so many chances and just like making things happen and creating opportunity for yourself. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I do too. So from sitting on the outside looking in and looking at, we get to have so many of these conversations and over the years, what makes somebody successful, and absolutely education is important. I think, the more you can educate yourself, whether it's through a formal education or you pick up a book or you sit across from someone and you get the wisdom that they can provide to you. What stands out are the characteristics and the steps that people take to success and the risks that they take. And listening to your story, just saying, hey, I'm going to go put on a fashion show and I don't know how to do it. And I'm going to go pick these people who need hours. All of those things stand out.
Yeah.
That when you hear someone's story who's struggling and saying, I don't know why I can't get here, it's because of this person or that person, that I didn't hear from you. I heard of all the reasons why. So those are characteristics that I think are incredibly important. So we went down a couple of rabbit holes, so I'm going to bring us back.
Yes.
So I'm going to go down another rabbit hole. And we'll keep it surface level, but we've had this conversation before. But you've mentioned therapy a couple of times. So when we think about therapy in your journey, how has it helped you? What are your recommendations to others? Your thoughts? Any insight you can provide there?
Yeah, I think even if someone doesn't think that they need therapy, it's just nice to talk to someone else who is just not a part of your life in any way, that doesn't know your background. It's kind of what you're telling them. They have like an outside perspective. My biggest thing about it is, if you don't like the first person you go to, like go to someone else and give them at least like 3 sessions. It's kind of like the same way that you date. You have to date your therapist to find someone that like works. And I just think, for me, it's been something that kind of helps me get out of my head a little bit. As you were saying, like I'm an overachiever, but also like severe imposter syndrome, or I feel inadequate at times. And like, it drives me to be more of an overachiever. Like those things like are very connected. And I think because of that, sometimes I just like would run myself down to the ground and it would affect other parts of my life. And for me, it was just something that was like, when you take away this like big dream that I had, and and having success in a career, it's like I also lost who I was outside of that. I was like, did I even have hobbies? It's like when people asked me what I like to do for fun, it was drink at happy hour and work. And I was like, that's not a real hobby. Drinking is not a hobby. It's a fun pastime, but it's not a hobby. And so, yeah, for me, it was this thing to like help realize how I can be like healthier in a work environment and how I can just have like better relationships and not have to like think about what am I getting out of this relationship and how it's going to like propel me, because sometimes I would think about that too, and that's just not like how human connection is supposed to work. And so I guess just it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different thing. It just teaches you how to be self-aware and find the triggers in your life. But you also have to be ready for therapy. And if you're not ready and you go, it's going to be a waste of money and time.
And
so.
would you say that, and not a lot of people associate this therapy with their career, but would you say that it's had a meaningful impact on your career?
Yeah. I mean, I just think I have a lot of like interface with people, and I work in entertainment. So we work with a lot of celebrities or directors, showrunners, a lot of big personalities. And so by like finding the things that are like triggers to me or how I work as a person and figuring out how like all of that is, it helps me be able to like be successful, and then working with other personalities and learning how to like kind of wash a day if it was a really bad one. But yeah, it helped me with my communication and being able to maintain certain aspects of my job.
Yeah, I think it's important. There's all different ways, and people that we have in our lives. We have friends, there's therapists, there's coaches, there's mentors. So I think when you take them all together, everybody plays a role. So thank you for sharing and being so open about it.
Yes.
So I want to go. Or did you have a question, Natasha?
No. So I was interested in, you hit on some of those details of big personalities, and I've seen some of your I stalked your social, to be honest with you. So I also follow you, so like I've seen some of the work that you've done. So I guess if we're going back a little bit, so you started doing, like, you did the LA Fashion Week and then the Sacramento, and you're getting into these, starting to work with people in entertainment. So how did you kind of get to the next level? I've seen some of the work you've done, and you've worked for some definitely recognizable names. So was that did that happen kind of quickly after, or how did you get to kind of where you are now?
Yeah, I did like another scare my parents moment when after like about 2.5 years of being home after I left college. Again, I was just like, I had this feeling. I was like, it's my things are better at home. I was like, I have to leave now. And it was another kismet moment where I was like, I thought I was going to move to Chicago. And I was like looking at apartments, and I'd applied to a few jobs. And then my aunt went to Bora Bora, and she met this woman named Leah. And Leah was like, have your niece call me, and I'm going to get her a job in LA working at a fashion brand. And a week later, I was moving to LA, like back into an apartment with like multiple girls. I think it was 5 of us in a 2-bedroom. And I was just like, this is happening. I didn't like have a real job. Like, she just said she could get me one. And then she ended up not being able to get me one. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was like 6 months, another very depressive 6 months where I was stylist for this company called Stitch Fix, where you you basically just like style people and tell them, oh, these items look great on you. I was doing that for cash, but I was also like doing odd jobs, like helping at weddings and serving and just doing anything I could to like make money. I remember buying at this time like Thai food that would last an entire week because I just like didn't have money. And it was just this crazy thing. And yeah, later on, like she did get me a job, but it was just like 6 months delayed. And it was actually not a job. It was an unpaid internship. And I realized that when I was at this fashion brand that I was like, oh, I think I hate fashion. I think I just do not like the people that are here. And I am not ever going to be very skinny. It was an environment that just did not make me feel great about myself in a time that was already so hard. And so one day on a whim, while I was working at this like fashion brand, I was looking for different like magazine jobs, like part-time jobs to go along with like the Stitch Fix styling. And I saw that the Hollywood Reporter had a photo department intern. And in my head, I was like, oh, I'll apply to this so that I can then work on the editorial, like journalism side of things. So I'll start in the photo department. And I applied that day and got an interview the next day and got the job same day of the interview.
Wow.
So like
for the Hollywood
that
Reporter.
happened for the Hollywood Reporter.
Wow.
And that happened really quickly. It was like overnight. And for a while, I was able to do both of the internships, like the fashion one and working at the Hollywood Reporter. And it was just this like moment that clicked when I was there that I was like, wow, everyone here is so nice. They're in like a creative, collaborative environment. And I was like, this is exactly what I was doing at both like freestyle and yearbook. And I was like, I didn't even know that this was a job, that like photo producers existed. Like I knew photo shoots happened. I just didn't know how, like in what capacity. And it was this thing was like when the internship ended, I like went home and cried because I didn't have a job again. And B, I was like, that was it. Like I'm supposed to be there and I'm now leaving this place that felt like I went through this past like 6 months for this place specifically. And it wasn't until like 2 months later that the woman who was the photo director of the photo department like basically called me and was like, yeah, I want you to be my assistant, but you have to give me some time to like figure out how to move my person who's currently an assistant so you can come in and work for me. And then, 3 months after that conversation, like I then was her assistant and got an actual job there.
That's really cool. So I'm going to pause you real quick. So
yeah,
that phone call is based on all of the work that you did and the work effort that work ethic that she saw. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So while you're going through an internship, like just to set the stage from what I'm seeing as we tell a story, right? You've gone through a lot of different challenges and you're doing 2 internships, but you clearly have a talent, one, but then also the work ethic and the grind to impress the people to get the job. So you kept your positive. Maybe not everybody saw it, like we're not perfect, but you kept it throughout that entire time in order to get that call. Fair?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just this, like, I guess it like networking experience, like having other internships prior to that. It was like, I'm here for 3 months. I told them I'm in college. At some point, they're going to figure out I'm not in college, which they actually never found out. So that was really good for me. But it was a thing where I was like, I need to, and no one told me this. I think actually that's a lie. I remember, I don't know where I heard it, but someone was like, if you need to write down like the top jobs that you want, and then you need to like research how those people got there and basically follow in their steps. And so then it was like all the people I admired in the video and the photo department, even some of like the editors, I would just ask them if they could have coffee, if they could talk to me, like if I could interview them about their process and how they got to where they were. And that's just how I learned. And anytime I was free, I was actively emailing to be like, is there something I can work on? Can I help you? Like, I also just like don't like to not be busy. And if I was sitting there and there was no work, I was like, I'll do anything. I'll like reorganize magazines. I'll like file invoicing and put them, in the right dates. Like, and that was just something that I did there that I didn't even think about. I was like, oh, I'm doing this to like get the job. I was just doing it to like learn as much as I could and get the most out of that experience as I could. Like, And anytime like we need someone on a fashion or a photo shoot, it was like, I'm available. I don't care what I have going on that day. Like I'll make it work.
Yeah, and availability is incredibly important. We talk about this all the time, making yourself available, but you're also networking. Having that cup of coffee and having that conversation. They are having conversations after they spoke with you and highlighting, the good, and it all adds up. All of those things add up into what positioned you to get that job.
And
so
can I ask a question on that really quick? So taking the step to ask somebody, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. Hey, can you get coffee? Or, hey, I want to pick your brain. That's also a step in itself. So were people very receptive to that? Or did you have to sift through people and like a couple said yes? Or were they pretty open to that idea?
I had a really incredible experience that everyone I worked with was so willing to share information, which was something that I didn't get at the fashion brand. Like everyone was so afraid of being replaced that they just didn't help anyone succeed. Mm. Whereas, at the Reporter, everyone was so willing to help and teach that I didn't ever feel like they didn't want to talk to me. And I also got very lucky that like Jen Lasky, who was the photo director of both the video and photo departments, like she is someone who is really well known like in the industry, and like she just has a talent for like spotting talent. And everyone who is on her team, she like kind of like hand curated and picked, and she like started major like photographers' careers. And she told me like very early on that she was like, she's like, I think you could be a super producer, but you have to put in a lot of work. And there was a lot of things like on the other side of that like she did test me a lot in order to be like, I'm like, if you can prove me right, then like you will be who you want to be, kind of thing.
Very cool.
Impactful.
Yeah.
Always ask people about their mentors. So that's awesome.
So I want to be sensitive time. We're at right at 50 minutes. So about 10, 15 more minutes. And I got a lot that I want to get in. So at the Hollywood Reporter, take us through, a day or a shoot or what you're doing, who you're working with.
Yeah. When I was there, because I left there a year ago, but like towards the last, like 2 years that I was there, I was, one of two producers. And so my job was, if there needed to be a photo shoot, like let's say like Chris Evans needed to be on the cover for Captain America, it would come across like our desk. And with myself and the photo director, we would like basically decide who we wanted to shoot it, how we wanted to like creatively put it together, like what themes from maybe what they're promoting / maybe what we haven't seen them do before. And then we come up with a creative concept with the photographer. And then it would be my job to secure a location. If we needed a set designer, to hire a stylist, if they didn't have one, their hair and makeup people, set a date, a time. And then when we were there, it was then art directing. So making sure that we have enough horizontals, verticals, like if something's not working properly, like then we need to like pivot. It's like making sure that the styling's there, like making sure that talent feels comfortable, catering, making sure there's enough water for people. And then when the photo shoot is done, all of those images would be sent to me. And then I would basically take, if we shot 1,000 images, I would take it down to 20 images of the best ones from the 4 different setups we did. And I would send it to the designers. And then the designers would choose with the creative director their favorite 6 images, like the cover, what goes on the table of contents, and then like the feature layout. And it would come back to myself and the director, and we would make our notes. If we didn't like maybe one of the images, we like this one better, can we try it? We'd all collaborate to like choose the images that are going to go out into print. And then from there, it's also giving all of the retouching notes and making sure if there's something that maybe talent is uncomfortable with, that we help that, or if there's any distractions. Like we did very minimal retouching, but it still happened. And then after that, it would just ship out. and we would wait for it to come out. And we were doing that weekly for sometimes like 6 to 10 shoots at a time. So it was just nonstop on this wheel of like working with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. And I also did photo shoots for billboards. So I was also working for some of the biggest names in music and being on set with them and creating these like concepts. And so it was a lot of fun.
Wow, interesting. So were you intimidated working with the talent and just everything that goes along with that?
I mean, of course, like as someone who's a fangirl, like, you know, you're meeting some of the people that you never thought you'd be in the same room as, but it's also this very interesting like professionalism. And the one thing that I've encountered a lot that's really hard is like, I am a young, like attractive female. And so it can be really hard when you're in charge of a set of people who are all older than you, like that have more status than you. It's like, I'm the one in charge in that moment. And so I have to like command a room in order for like them to believe that I'm going to set them up for success in that moment. So it's this thing where it's like, it's very nerve-wracking, but I also have to like be very confident and secure and like like fake it till you make it and be like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, so
at all times.
You had to overcome imposter syndrome all over again, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yep.
So I have to ask a question real quick.
Yeah.
Who was, as a fangirl, what was the biggest movie star? What was the biggest singer, artist? Which one did you were so excited?
I mean, there's so many. I always ask people like, well, who do you want to know about? But for me, I think one of the more special days that I had is during COVID, we shot Ben Affleck at his house.
Wow.
And it was this crazy experience where it was just myself, the photographer and assistant, and he led us into his like basically editing room. And he just like showed us all of the cameras that he had shot all of his movies on. And we spent like an hour with him. And it was just one of these really special moments that I was like, nobody's ever given me this kind of like time and just like being so considerate and nice. And that one was something that I was like, I'll never forget that. And then Oprah listening to Frozen soundtrack while we photographed her was like this weird thing that you would never assume that Oprah would want to listen to Frozen. So
wow.
Yeah.
So you do have some big names.
So I've seen some of the posts, and I was going to frame it a little bit differently and ask maybe what work you were most proud of. And so they might be the same, but I can imagine that you probably had some shoots that are just like, oh my gosh, it went like we had the vision and it got there. And, you know, it's all that work. You're facilitating so many people and so many different personalities, and all of that must be incredibly hard. And then to see a final product. And I'm sure there's lots of fangirling, but I think that is like just a very interesting, you know, it's like all this stuff that goes into the cover, right? And then it's like, oh my gosh, it was just what I wanted. So I'm sure, or maybe I should ask, like, is that did you have those moments where it's like, oh man, I'm super proud of that one?
Yeah. I sometimes like you get very jaded very quickly, I think, in this industry, and you forget that what you're doing is something that people would kill to do. So there's a lot of times that as soon as the cover came out, I was like, I can't even look at this anymore. I've like looked at 5 rounds of this image, and it was so bad to say, like, when people would be like, oh, this is so incredible, this is amazing. But there are moments that just like, it's just this clarity. We did a photo shoot with Lady Gaga, and the concept was more driven by like the photo director and the photographers, but there was still on set and did all like the logistical producing of it. And like there was this moment when Gaga was like looking at all of the finished images and kind of like we're all choosing them together, and she put her 6 up, and she talked about herself as like a third person, where she's like, that's her, like that's Gaga, like that's almost Gaga. And she was also like creating her own brand while we were there. And there was a moment when she was like, in that moment, she's like, this may be my favorite cover I've ever done. And she was telling us how she would retouch it to like to even stand out more. And she had all of these like ideas and just brought it. And it was this thing that like both my boss and I, because we had a hard season, like there's only two of us doing like almost 300 shoots a year. And it was just at the end of a really hard time. And we just both like sat there afterwards. And her whole team was so nice. It was just like, this is why we do it. It's because, not that we're like getting time with Gaga. It's that like all of these creative minds are coming together to like create an image that's going to stand for a moment in time. And it's like, once that image goes out into the world, like that's it forever and ever and ever. There is no takebacks. And so it's like making sure that that's perfect and that everyone involved is happy. And it's like, that day we had like the hair and makeup. They're like, well, what if we do this? Or what are you thinking about eyeliner this way? And it was just this thing where it's like everybody has a part to play in that one shoot. Is like everyone just felt like they touched it. They touched that image, which was really special. So wow. Yeah, there are days that like make you be like, this is bigger than me.
Remind you that
that's... And they can hear the passion.
Yeah, I love it.
So I want to ask real quick. So where are you now? And then we have a couple staple questions, but you left Hollywood Reporter. Tell us where you're at now.
Yeah, so I'm at CBS right now. So I'm doing something a little different. I'm working for a network. So basically every episodic that comes out for a TV show, they have an image that shows with that. And it's my job to basically read the script and hire the photographer for the days to shoot the coverage that's going to best represent that episode without giving spoilers. And then the other thing that I do is producing key art. So if there's like a billboard for like New Girl, or I'm like trying to think of shows that are out, like a Magnum PI, I did recently, like, then I help create like that art along with the marketing team to basically then market and promote that show. So it's like, then that's like the movie poster you see, or the billboard that you see, or if you're like clicking through shows on a streaming platform, like that image is curated by like my team and marketing.
Very, very cool. Incredible story. And I know Natasha has a couple of questions, and then I have a couple, and then we'll give you some time.
I always take my notes here. So, so fascinating work. It seems like I can only imagine like the speed at which you work, like, right, all of the different people and personalities and all of that stuff. It seems like it's the industry, right, is from somebody who, it's what we think about, I guess, is what you imagine is like, wow, it must be wild. So in all of that, I kind of have a twofold question for you. So one, do you see yourself in your position as, and I guess in your experience as a leader? Like, would you call yourself a leader? Good question. Huh?
I mean, I am in a leadership position technically, and I've like had senior and director titles, but it's hard to like, do I personally like see myself as a leader? Like, no.
I think it's, and I asked the question because I think a lot of people see, they're like, this is just like, what I do, or I'm just passing it on. It's what I learned from. And so I think that's always something interesting, is that I think that I, especially as I'm just like a leadership nerd, but especially with the podcast, I'm like, there's so many people who I think sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for. So that was kind of where my question was going. But also in all of so when you're doing that, when you had those titles, when you have people under you, you're managing a set or whatever the whole day, what are we ask about leadership principles, and I'm kind of stealing your question, hopefully, sorry, I'm not. What kind of, I guess, yes, leadership principles do you think have made you successful, given you the ability to get through to people, get through the task, the project, whatever it is? Any principles kind of stand out?
Yeah, I think the one thing is like, anytime I'm on set or I'm like working with someone, it's like the key to being successful, like on a set, was, no job is too small for even me. Like, my boss taught me that early on, that she was like, if we go into a grimy bar, because that's where we're photographing someone and they didn't clean up the night before, like it's our job to clean up the cigarette butts. And I know that sounds gross, but it's like, she is someone who has had 20 years that shouldn't be getting down on the floor and doing that, or like going and getting coffee for people. But like that was her model. And that was something that I took and that I learned. And so, you know, anytime that I had someone underneath me who kind of like had an attitude that thought they were too good for something, it was like, all right, well, you're going to be benched, because I don't want that type of, you know, like personality on my sets. And we're all here to work together as a team. And, you know, nobody is better than anyone else. And even like someone who is PA, like sometimes would be like, oh, what do you think of this image? Like it's like making everyone feel like they're a part of it, but also understanding the system in which things work. And so, and it's also like everyone was very giving with their time for me, starting out in the industry. So it's like, I'm very giving with my time for anyone who's underneath me or needs more clarification, or if like they're too busy, then I'm going to work on it, and kind of just having this open line of communication, and just knowing that like if you're going to lead a team, then like you also need to know exactly like how to do everything that you're expecting the people beneath you to do.
It's very true. It's very true. It's good. So I just have one more question, and it's kind of one of my staple questions. I said it earlier, hindsight's always 2020. And so when we interview older people, I ask them to look back at their 30-year-old self, but you're not even 30 yet. So I'll say, we'll go back to 20-year-old Kayla. So if knowing what you know now, being where you are right now on this journey, have a job that you're right, people would probably kill to have. If you were talking to your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
I would just like tell younger me to just breathe and just just keep doing what you're doing. Like it's going to work out. It's not going to be easy, but like, yeah, I think the fact that like I did have this like drive and focus, I was like, I don't want them to change too much of what they did. But yeah, it's just knowing that like, just keep your head down, do really good work, be nice, and you can get pretty far in that sometimes.
Agreed.
Love it.
I love it. So I have a few staple questions. So if you had one more conversation you could have with somebody, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Just like any type of conversation with someone?
Any type of conversation. Any person, any type of conversation.
You could know them. You don't have to know them. Either way.
I mean, yeah, I think the one person that I really like is this author, Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I just like want to talk to her about her writing. And she's the only person that I literally was in a nervous sweat. And I could not talk to when I did a photo shoot with her.
Oh, wow.
So I just would love to talk to her about her process and how she writes. Because she's like wildly successful, and her first book was about like the love interest dying in the first like 5 pages, which I was like, how did anyone greenlight this? I need to know.
Very good. Very good. Okay. The next one is a question from our previous guest. So how do you define success?
Well, right now, I define success as like how to be happy in both like my professional and my personal life. And that's something that the last year been like, okay, like I'm successful in the sense of my career, but I haven't maybe accomplished a few things personally that I really want to. And so I think in order to constantly be succeeding, like I have to do things that challenge me. So it was really important for me to go back to school. There was like, I wanted to do something more challenging than my job. So I started like, picking up triathlons as a hobby. So I think to me, it's like succeeding is always like finding the things that bring me joy and not this superficial happiness, but it's like, what are the joyful things that I want to accomplish, and And success is like, you know, being a really good friend, showing up for people, showing up in my job, like, you know, doing things that excite me that nowadays maybe isn't exactly like professional.
I love it. I love it. And
Me
so
too.
on that question, what question do you have for our next guest? It can be any question you want.
Oh yeah, good one.
Putting me on the spot here.
It could be super creative. It sounds like that's your wheelhouse. So it could be.
I feel like I always love to ask this people like this questions, like if you could do anything without failing, what would you do?
Ooh,
I like it.
I'm writing it down. If you could do anything without failing.
Without failing, what would you do?
I like it.
Because you'll find the answers like some random people would be like, I want to be a classical pianist.
I can't wait to ask. So we're going to close it out. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Absolutely engaging conversation. A little over an hour. It went super fast. I hope it went fast for you as well. But thank you for being on our podcast and taking the time out of your day to talk to us, and look forward to sharing your story. It's an incredibly fascinating story.
Me too.
Thank you for having me. I was really nervous, so it was like great talking to both of you and doing this.
I love it. That's what we hope for. And I also wanted to second that thank you. I know I reached out to a couple people. I'm like not ashamed to slide into people's DMs. So I'm really appreciative that you answered. And I've been, like I said, I follow you and I watch what you're doing. And I knew that it looked like there were some cool things, both personally and professionally, that you were doing. I've seen in those posts, but to hear your story today, this is exactly why we do the podcast. And I love having somebody who, once they get into that sweet spot of talking about what they're passionate about, which is absolutely what we got from you. And I'm always looking for things that our listeners can take away, and I take just as many notes for myself. So it's been a while since we've talked, and it sounds like you've had, quite the journey. So I appreciate you sharing it. And I think that, you should keep that advice, keep doing what you're doing and working hard and being nice. And I'm really hoping that this episode impacts a lot of people. So really appreciate your time and you being on it.
Oh, thanks. I mean, thanks for reaching out, and I apologize. I was like traveling and didn't respond right away.
No, that's like, I was like, this is why, because she's so cool, like doing all the things. So, I'm going to ask about the Inspire. Yeah. So I also, and sorry I didn't prep you for this one, but last thing, we always ask our guests to tell us someone or something that inspires them. So it could be recent, it could be just in general, but do you have someone or something you would call out as your inspiration?
I mean, I think I have to bring it back to my parents.
Yeah.
They're two people who think they've been married like almost 30 years, and they've faced a lot of hardship and they've stayed married, and they're just two people who know what it is to have grace and persevere. And I think subconsciously that's where I learned how to be driven. It's maybe their marriage is more of their success story than I think maybe either of their careers for me. But yeah, it's both of them that just, I don't know, keep me going and wanting to be someone that they're proud of.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
They're proud of you, and they're going to tell you after they hear this. So
yeah, I love it too. It's a really, really good one. Awesome. All right. Is that it? I'll close this out. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. I will take us out. Gramps, Millennial, and Kayla out.